We have journeyed with the teacher from Ecclesiastes through these weeks of Lent. At times, we've maybe found some wisdom there. Other times, maybe we've hinted towards the need for a better teacher. But I do hope that you've at least appreciated some of the perspective and outlook of the teacher, who at times may seem bleak, and yet he's still one who can find a path to joy in the midst of lives that are marked by toil. I know for some, this has not been a comfortable journey. And some have wondered, why on earth have we spent so much time with this challenging, maybe even for some despair-inducing text within our scripture? I would offer you this reminder. We find ourselves in the time of Lent. It's a long journey, but not one that, if we do it right, should ever be a walk in the park. Indeed, this is a time to journey through wilderness, the thorns of wilderness. So we've hung with this teacher through these weeks, considering with him that all may be vanity, and that our lives under the sun can be marked by disappointments and limitations. And the part we don't always like to remember, there will inevitably be an expiration date. Even our lives' work, which can consume so much of our days and our time, for the teacher is another place for vanity, even as we can find some joy in the midst of the toil. Last week, Reverend Ed gave us a break, well, sort of. He asked us to welcome the gift of lament as we considered Psalm 137. But today we return once more to the teacher in Ecclesiastes to consider eternity. Now in church, eternity is so often a source of our deepest hopes. As in eternity is where we will know fully the eternal embrace of a God that we know of as love. But for our teacher today, as you may have anticipated or even expected by this point, eternity, just like the rest of it, is one more place where we are confronted with the vanity of it all. Hear the good news, my friends. Right before our passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, the teacher muses on time in the voice of Pete Seeger, or maybe you more likely know it through the Song of the Birds. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. The seasons keep turning us back to what was. A time to be born is consumed in a time to die. War, then peace, and so on and so forth. Another reminder that in all the things that we experience, there is nothing new under the sun. But then, as we've heard today, after this musing on time, the teacher shifts our attention to eternity. Until this moment, the teacher of Ecclesiastes has had us reflecting on what happens down here, under the sun. But now it's as if for the first time in this book that the teacher looks up, as if squinting a little bit to notice that there is something that is beyond. It isn't the sort of thing that you can stare at for long. The eyes weren't made for that. But the teacher looks long enough to see that whatever is above it all is vanity too. Elusive, yes, but we can still sense that there is something beyond this life. For God has placed within us a sense of eternity. Yet, that eternity which is so vast is beyond our ability to truly comprehend. And as much as we might try to understand, we cannot know what God has done or what God will do. And yet, after surveying it all and finding that all is vanity, as the teacher teeters on this line between the meaning of life and this sense of meaninglessness, he does not resign himself to despair. Even with what may seem like a very bleak outlook that we've listened to for the last several weeks, the teacher still knows that there is joy to be found in this life. There is still happiness to be experienced in it all. Isn't it fascinating? Especially in a time when so many people are flirting with despair. The teacher of Ecclesiastes has something to say to us. But also, I realize that thinking about Ecclesiastes through the season of Lent seems a little bit odd, especially offered from a place like this, a pulpit, a place where we expect to hear good news week in and week out. But I'd suggest that even in his own odd way, the teacher in Ecclesiastes leaves some space for hope, leaves some space for a God who is beyond our ability to comprehend, a God who is not bound under the sun as our lives are. But instead of offering us any sort of firm answers or dogmas on which we can build our understanding, the teacher leaves us with a deep sense of mystery. Mystery at that which is beyond. Our roundtable preaching team, maybe you've heard me start talking about this a bit more and drawing in some of their insights. They had the gift of starting up again at the beginning of Lent and reading these passages from Ecclesiastes. I think the timing was good, so I have someone else to blame for all of these conversations. But I've started to hear more questions. We've got a feedback loop where I'm getting more information back from those of you who are out there rather than just what's in my own head. And I've been hearing questions like, why on earth are we reading Ecclesiastes? Why are you subjecting us to this? If I might take a few moments to try to answer that question for you. The first is, I had a hunch that Ecclesiastes might be interesting. And I stand by that. I think I've been interested as of late. But more than that, in the season of Lent, this is a time of preparation, a time to reflect on our lives and prepare for the good news of Easter. Lent, as much as it is marked by the wilderness wanderings of Jesus, a time that he fasted and prayed and was tempted, as much as that is not easy, the season of Lent, which is shaped around that time Jesus spent in the wilderness, is a gift to us. It's a time to call us back to reflect, to pray, to consider our lives. And if Ecclesiastes does anything, it invites us to consider the meaning of our lives. And I fear at times that church is a place that we go so that we don't have to experience the reality and the hard parts of our lives. Preacher, just tell us something good because there's so much bad out there. But I assure you, we don't gather here to shield ourselves from the truth. In fact, I believe that we come together so that we can tell the truth to one another. Not to bury our heads in the sand as if hope requires some level of ignorance from us. And on top of that, I know I feel the struggle on a daily basis. What does it really mean to be human in a technological age? And what is the source of a good life? And how do we find meaning and joy in the days that we live our lives? Those are good questions for us to ask in the season of Lent, probably any time, but especially in this season of Lent. And the teacher in Ecclesiastes asks the right questions and provides some answers, even if they aren't all entirely satisfactory for us. But when it all gets down to it, and if I'm honest, when we are reading, or the reason that we are reading Ecclesiastes in Lent is because I knew that it would make some of us really uncomfortable. I like when that happens. And I don't mean that in a cruel way, or at least I don't think I mean that in a cruel way. But I know that it is often the moments that we are jolted out of our comfort that we are most prepared to consider the things that really matter. And once more, isn't that what Lent is all about? The teacher in Ecclesiastes keeps it interesting for us. And if we hang with him, we have to keep asking, really? And we might respond, no, he can't be right. But then again, maybe? Possibly? But who knows? Some of us long for the comfort of a predictable world where there is order. And maybe someday we'll spend 5 weeks looking at Proverbs, and you can get that week after week after week. For there, wisdom is rewarded rightly, and punishment too. But Ecclesiastes is a little bit more raw. It's wisdom for this real world that we live in. And the teacher is a bit of a truth-telling jester who leaves us with more questions than easy answers. And for that reason, Ecclesiastes is a Lenten gift to us. Even through his stark take on this life under the sun. The door remains open, though, to a God who is not bound by our limitations here. Perhaps in that way, the teacher invites us to a place of wonder and awe at a God who is other, beyond, ineffable, or in a word, a God who is holy. If you want my take, and maybe you don't by this point, the teacher in Ecclesiastes is an incredible conversation partner. The teacher makes space for those among us who have big questions and who doubt. The teacher looks at the unsavory parts of life and finds a resilient hope. Even if it's realistic, a bit bleak, and beyond easy answers. But I don't want to grant the teacher the last word. I wonder in what ways the teacher is bound by his life experience. You might remember we looked at the first week or two, and we considered that this was written in the voice of Solomon. Whether it was Solomon or not is inconsequential. But he was someone who had it all. He had power. He had all the creature comforts of life. He had everything that one could want in this life. But it seems like it had just left him jaded. So as we consider the teacher, I would like to leave you with two alternative perspectives. One from a poet, and the other is an invitation to join a crowd. But first, a word from the poet. Mary Oliver muses in her poem, The Summer Day. This isn't the entire poem, but it's about half of it. She writes, I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one? Sorry. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Perhaps that's a nice contrast for us to the teacher's outlook, and an invitation for you. Next week is Palm Sunday. Be invited to pick up a palm branch, join in the procession and the crowd that gathered on the outskirts of Jerusalem. But more importantly than where they gathered, it's the reason that they gathered that matters. They joined together with a sense of possibility that emerged because they knew that God had pierced the divide and drew near to us here in this life, under the sun, to bring about God's vision to this world. Amen.
I don't know.